When I was in high school, I didn't want to get any girls pregnant and I didn't want to get an STD. And I found out that if you're a guy, there's this thing you can put on that will protect you against STDs and pregnancy. Do you know what that was? It was my Starfleet uniform. 100% effective against STDs and pregnancies. Today I will be talking to you about abstinence, the personal benefits that it brings, and the benefits that it brings to a marriage. But this isn't going to be a youth pastor preaching hellfire and brimstone. I'm just going to be talking to you about the scientific studies and a couple experts. So we'll start off by looking at the personal benefits of abstinence. Now, one of the arguments against abstinence is that, you know what, people want pleasure. But the Social Organization of Sexuality, published in 1994 by Edward Lauman, says, a monogamous sexual partnership embedded in formal marriage evidently produces the greatest satisfaction and pleasure. So what that means is if you really are seeking pleasure through, premarital intercourse, you could actually have more if you stopped that search and waited until you had an actual marriage. In essence, I'm not really arguing that you should stop seeking pleasure. I just think you should stop seeking such a silly pleasure and start seeking a greater pleasure instead. C.S. Lewis said it best in his book, The Weight of Glory, published in 1949. He says, we're like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slums because he has no idea what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. And what it really comes down to is whether or not you can delay that gratification. If you can delay the gratification now, you'll have even more satisfaction, even more pleasure in the future. Abstinence also helps in your relationships leading up to marriage, believe it or not. And there's this myth that premarital sex is normal, natural, and necessary in a relationship. However, the American Psychological Association posted in the Journal of Family Psychology, December 2010, in an article titled Compatibility or Restraint by Dean M. Busby, that both structural equation and group comparison analysis demonstrated that sexual restraint was associated with better relationship outcomes. So instead of sex being a necessary component of a premarital relationship, it's actually something that hinders premarital relationships to reach their full potential. And what this does, this really is just a slap in the face to the worldview which says, why would you buy the car without a test drive? And that's the view that people have. The problem is you can't have a relationship with somebody, a real relationship, if you see them as a piece of property that's made to be tested. Okay, people aren't like cars that you test and use. People are human beings that we're supposed to love and cherish, and you can't have a relationship with a piece of property. Next, we'll talk about the marriage benefits, the benefits of abstinence in an actual marriage. And some people will be tempted to say that marriage it's outdated, it's old-fashioned, it's old school, it's no longer culturally relevant. Here's the thing, okay? There's a huge battle in the media right now over marriage, okay? Over whether or not homosexuals should be allowed to have marriages or not. And you can go back and forth on this issue. However, the fact that there's such a heated battle over marriage right now proves that it is a necessary, vital, important institution. So Mark Driscoll, the author of Real Marriage, says in an article titled Sex, God, Gross, or Gift, written February 22nd, 2012, that your standard of beauty is your spouse. All right, one of the things that makes a marriage, a long-term monogamous relationship, work is seeing your spouse as your standard of beauty. And the problem with that is that if you've had, premarital sexual relationships, premarital cohabitation, pornography addiction, all of those things are going to start shaping your standard of beauty, shaping your standard of what sexuality is, before you even meet your spouse. And so instead of seeing him or her as your ideal, your perfection, you're seeing all that you've had before as your ideal or perfection and then putting that on your spouse. And that can't lead to a healthy marriage. Abstinence also leads to greater satisfaction in a marriage. A scientific review of abstinence and abstinence programs by Dr. Bradford Wilcox, written in February 2008, says that a number of studies suggest that adults who waited to have sex until they married and who remained faithful to their spouses since they married report higher levels of life satisfaction. And again, this comes back to delayed gratification, because you can forego what's going to happen the rest of your life in 20 minutes before you get married. Not realizing that that's going to affect, from like 30 is the national average for marriage, from 30 on, you're going to be in this monogamous relationship, and you're going to have more satisfaction for the next 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years if you can hold out. In conclusion, it really is better on a personal level and a marriage level to abstain from sexual intercourse until marriage. The personal benefits include more pleasure in the long run. And the marital benefits include, having a wife or a husband who really is your standard of beauty, which leads to more satisfaction throughout the marriage. It really is a good idea to abstain from sex until you're married. So I hope that the next time you think about abstinence, you don't think of the gym teacher from Mean Girls. Instead, you think of the scientific data and the experts that I presented today.